Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Air Force Association's annual Aerospace Cyber Conference and Trade Show just outside Washington, D.C., the #1 gathering of U.S. Air Force leaders from around the world on this, the 72nd anniversary of the United States Air Force. Our coverage here is sponsored by L3 Harris and Leonardo DRS, and it's my honor to be talking again to United States Air Force Lieutenant General Catfish Rice, who is the Director of the Air National Guard, sir, and former Adjutant General of the Massachusetts Guard. Sir, it's always an honor and pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Varga. And it's great to see you, great to talk to you, and what a great year for the 72nd anniversary. In fact, I think I'm joining you. I don't feel a day over 75, 80. I'm not sure how you feel, but this is an exciting time.
You're always looking good from that standpoint. And I think the Air Force is looking pretty good, too. So let's talk a little bit about Guard and Reserve, right? So great power competition. That's the focus, whether on the active duty side. We had a chance to talk to General Scobie, talk to us a little bit on the reserve side. You two are working a whole series of initiatives, right, whether on the readiness side with all the states. But also you have a strategic plan that you're working to make sure that units don't fall through the cracks ultimately.
Absolutely.
So walk us through sort of the macro level strategic plan, and then I can get into a little bit of the micro of how you're adapting and working the force to get it postured for what's to come.
So in the big picture, it's a great challenge to get after maintaining the force you have and also getting after the force we need. That is, you can't do both. We just don't have enough taxpayers' money to do that, and we don't want to abuse the great gift Congress has given us with all that great buying power to do both. Or to get after both, and we can't do both. So I bring, along with the Air Force Reserves, an opportunity to do very cost-effectively, maintain the force we have, yet at the same time working towards transforming the Air Force we need.
And what is the challenge there, right? I mean, the active duty force does have a little bit more flexibility when it's moving units and changing them, whereas for the, and moving capability in and out, or for example, sunsetting a capability. For a Guard unit, that's sort of a death knell, isn't it? So what are you working to try to avoid that kind of an eventuality? Say, for example, A-10s are going to go away. Let's hypothetically say that. That's a third rail issue, right? But the concern also is not necessarily the airplane going away, but the unit going away, and sometimes there's a time phasing issue between the retirement of an asset and when you bring something in. What's the strategic thinking to avoid those ups and downs and maintain this capability?
And for sure, because it takes us time to grow a fifth-generation fleet in the fighter force, and it takes us time to downsize and transform from a fourth-gen fleet. And A-10 example, F-15s, F-16s, we're operating, maintaining, and flying those right now. And capability in the Air Force is not a light switch. We don't turn one off and then turn the next one on. It doesn't happen overnight. So if that gap in time between downsizing, turning off one of our fourth-gen capability as we move to a fifth-gen, if that happens over 2, 4, 6, 10 years, that unit tends to disappear, fade away, and all that great experience we have is not a value anymore as a unit fades away. So we do need a short time between transition, yet we also need to recognize we need a little bit of time to make the change. We're in transformation right now with a unit like Burlington, Vermont, going from F-16s and after about a 6-month period of time, rolling right into F-35s. And that's a good transition, and those are the types of things I'm bringing to the Air Force as a cost-effective way to transform from one mission to another. Stop doing what we can't afford, what we don't need, what we don't want in the older legacy-type platforms, and move boldly into the force of the future, which will get into our high-end fight.
And Vermont is the very first Air National Guard F-35, right, which is about to be delivered.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, as we speak, we're getting some of the first maintenance delivery aircraft up there on the ramp. And then in a few weeks, we're going to have a ribbon cutting, an announcement, and an official event that shows, hey, we are boldly stepping in with the Air National Guard and the Air Force into the Air Force we need.
How are you working the great power competition thing, right? I mean, the Guard, just like the active and reserve component, and I think for folks who don't know the Air Force well enough, it is the most integrated of the services where it is invisible who's a guardsman, who's a reservist, or who's an active duty member, whether on a flight crew or even on a flight line anywhere. But this adaptation, there was a big adaptation adapting to Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, now going back to the great power mindset, which is where the Guard spent many, many decades, whether it was for interceptor squadron. You were an interceptor guy yourself for a long time, on, pulling some serious alert time. Walk us through how you're making this transformation to rebuild some of these high-end warfighting skills that are distributed all across the force.
Well, one of the things that the Guard brings is not only that, as we talk about that traditional part-time, full-time mix, which is very cost-effective, but because people stay and live and grow in a community and stay and fly with a unit 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years in some cases. In my case, I've been in Massachusetts for over 25 years. That experience base also brings the innovative nature of the Guard, where we have different ideas and we bring diversity from our community and our civilian employment, and we bring that very boldly and effectively into the service. So where we have on things like cyber and space, and we have CEOs and professionals at a very top high-performing level in the civilian and commercial market, and then they're also Guardsmen, and they put on the uniform. In cyber, we have CIOs and cyber professionals that bring great ideas to our enterprise. That is helping a lot transform the Air Force and the Air Guard into the force we need.
And when it comes to cyber talent management, right? I mean, everybody has said that actually the Guard is probably the best way to bring some of that talent to the force. From a standard standpoint, though, right, I mean, the big question is whether or not there should be a different set of standards for that. I know that there's been a lot of discussion on that. Where do you fall on that? I mean, are there new policies and doctrines and stuff? Because there is this tendency of thinking, well, cyber folks are a little bit different and they may need different standard sets, but at the same time, everybody's an airman and they're wearing the same uniform at the end of the day. Talk to us about the yin and yang of getting that right. Make sure you're flexible enough to get those CIOs and folks like that in, at the same time being like, hey, bub, this is the U.S. Air Force, welcome aboard.
Absolutely, and that's a challenge too, because when we talk about warrior and warrior ethos, we do need somebody that's physically fit and mentally capable, and personally, that's a good way to define your personal health. But professionally, that is as a representation. When you put the uniform on, you represent something bigger than yourself, and that has to have a standard unto itself that says, hey, we're professionals first and foremost, we're warriors in that light, and also we're a person that brings capability to the table. But as you balance that with some of our civilian expertise that has been very effective, yet don't meet that physical or standard that you see, then we are struggling with that, and we are working on that, and we're trying to define how do we bring professionals into our community, how do we have a force, and that's a question for the Department of Defense, not just the Air Force. And it's a challenge. I don't have the answers for you on that one.
The recruitment, right? Almost record low unemployment right now, or actually record low, or almost near record low unemployment. That always has a tendency of presenting a recruiting challenge. If you look at it, there are a lot of people who go directly into the Guard. On the other hand, the Guard also actively competes for a lot of talent that's leaving the active duty force. How are you doing on the retention, the transition from the active to the Guard, and how are you doing in recruitment to make sure that each of these units remain vibrant and viable with an ingress of new talent? Because as you said, folks have a tendency of staying in the Guard for a very long period of time.
Right, and so one of the things is we talk about money and the competition with the civilian market, particularly focused on pilots, that they can make a lot more money outside the military than they can in the military. And we're finding that's not so important as quality of life. And so as we work with the Air Force on quality of life and presenting that to the community, we're finding our retention is off the charts. People are staying in the Air Guard because we are focused on quality of life. We're giving them an opportunity to serve something bigger than themselves. And so our retention is very good, and accordingly, our recruitment is also growing, and we're going to be above end strength in not only the Air Guard, but also all three components of the Air Force, the reserves and the active duty. The Air Force is a good product, good model. It's a great place to work, and people know it, and they're seeing it.
How do you see the budgetary picture, right? I mean, things are going now, as you said, right? A nice, very great uptick in funding that's helped everybody work on readiness, work on some of the recapitalization, obviously with systems that have been in the pipeline for a long time, F-35 getting out to the fleet and force. How do you see the budgetary picture going forward? Because there are folks that you talk to both in the department and elsewhere. Hey, maybe the military services have to consider, should there be another downturn, hey, let's shrink a little bit, let's try to shed some manpower, let's try to put some of that to maintain the momentum on some of these acquisition programs. As you talk to folks and read some of the budgetary tea leaves, and especially as the Guard Director, right, you've got a number of people, each of the states have their ears to the rail, right, so your intelligence network is a little bit more extensive even than it is for the active and for the reserve component. How do you see this breaking out, and what are the ways, have you already started to develop prioritization lists to protect what's really dear if in a couple of years, for example, deficit reduction becomes a priority and folks want to redirect defense investment to retiring the nation's debt?
Well, the way I'm doing that is really through the Air Force. And the Air Force is the owner, the keeper of the budget, and we're supportive of that. We don't have our separate budget for the Air National Guard. We're part of the Air Force. So understanding what we can bring to the table and not bring to the table as a component, as the Air National Guard, that we're very, very cost effective with 1/3 of our force being full-time and 2/3 of our force being traditional part-time. That's a great cost-effective way to maintain force structure. So as the Air Force grows and shrinks, hey, let's grow and get after the things we need. Get after the Air Force we need. Get after those new weapon systems. Have some of those in the Guard. And then when we shrink, look to the Guard as a place to save and keep and maintain force structure as we go up and down. And so that's the matching that, understanding that on the Air Force corporate level is where I spend a lot of my time explaining who we are and our strength of character, which is a great value to our nation.
But ultimately, you also do advise the Air Force leadership on what your priorities are within your corner of the force. Is there a sense that the financial picture is going to look rosy for another few more years, or is it time to actually start considering the kind of priority, the priorities and capabilities you're going to shield, and some of the things you're going to trade away? Because as we heard from the chief yesterday, I think it was yesterday, this couple of days have been a blur, where he talked about there may be in the next upcoming budget some very major muscle movements in capabilities that we trade away. We heard that from Secretary Esper as well. So ultimately, have you thought through, hey, here are the capabilities we're going to retain, here's where we can take more risk, depending on how the budgetary picture shakes out?
Yes, and we've been hand in hand in discussion with the Air Force and the Air Force Programming Office to say, hey, this is the Air Force that we need. I got it, I understand, and then my job is to pull that through to, hey, I can take some risk here. Let's move on from the Air Force we have, and I can pull some of those into our program. So, for example, I see a very good picture for the fighter roadmap. We're all talking about buying. The Air Force we need is the industrial base to give us about 72 fighters a year, and with those kind of numbers of aircraft, we can do a recapitalization of our older fleet and get after some of these newer things and reduce the age of our fighter force, which is a cornerstone of our strength that is maintaining the peace.
Lieutenant General Catfish Rice, the Director of the Air National Guard. Sir, always a pleasure, and best of luck. I don't know if we can make it up to Vermont for the first Guard F-35, but that's really tremendous getting the capability out there, and particularly in the Northeast, so rah-rah.
Oh, it's awesome. And just a few weeks ago, we accepted and delivered the first tanker, KC-46, to the Guard. And I had personally had the great opportunity to fly out to Boeing, pick up that aircraft, actually take it off, and fly it across the country and land it at Pease. And not only that, the IP of record, one of the first two IPs in the unit was my son.
Oh,
so
wow.
we sat side by side as a legacy of service from our family to our nation. We were able to deliver side by side the first KC-46 to the Air National Guard, and that was a proud moment for me as a father, for me as a proud moment as director, and for me, very proud of the depth of capability of my son being one of the initial cadre from the unit.
That's awesome. And they let fighter guys fly tankers? I didn't realize that was even allowable.
Well, they took a little risk because I spent 20 years plus flying for United Airlines, and I've flown and I have type ratings in every Boeing aircraft, and so to jump back into the 767, which is now a KC-46, was warming my heart because I feel like I'm back home again. It was wonderful.
Fantastic, sir. Thanks very much, and congratulations to your son as well.
Oh, it's awesome. Thank you, Vargo. It's great to see you.